Hey everyone, we're back again here for these 33 days to Corpus Christi. And today I want to reflect with you a little bit on one expression of our faith in the real presence, and that's how we deal with fragments from the sacred host. And the priest is instructed to do a number of different things to safeguard, to protect, to make sure that not even one little piece of the host is lost. In the Gospels, we hear in the story of the miracle of the loaves, how after Jesus had worked this miracle and they distributed the loaves and there was enough for everyone to have and more left over, that the apostles were instructed to go and to gather up all the fragments, all the pieces of the loaves, whatever was left over, and they were so many baskets full. So for us during the Mass too, we're instructed to take very good care so that not any of the fragments from the host would be lost. And it can happen, right? Even you think when you're cutting a loaf of bread at home, there's all kinds of crumbs everywhere. So during the Mass, we use like a special host that has much less crumbs, but it's still possible. And so we have to be very careful so that we don't lose any fragments. No fragments fall onto the altar, or even worse, onto the ground and would get stepped on or something, right? That would be terrible. So I want to share with you today three ways that we are instructed to safeguard against losing those fragments. So the first one, you've probably seen this, especially for the traditional Mass. The priest is instructed to hold his thumb and his forefinger together like this. And there's two main reasons for this. One is he would do this just after the consecration, so the host becomes the body of Jesus. He would raise the host, then set the host down, and from that point on, these fingers are never separated except when he's touching the host. And the reason is basically, right, so that if there was any little crumbs or any fragments on his finger or on his thumb from touching the host, that those wouldn't fall off. If he held his hands out, maybe they would fall onto the ground, which would be terrible. So he's instructed to hold his finger and his thumb together. Also, what I love about it is, for me, when I'm holding my finger and thumb together, kind of in this weird position, right? It's a reminder to me as I'm praying of the sacredness of what's going on, of the true presence of Jesus in the Eucharist. That's why I'm holding them together, is because Christ is really here. This isn't ordinary bread. It's bread from heaven. So the second thing I want to show you has to do with the cloths on the chalice, right? So this is my chalice. The first time I used it was at my first Mass after I became a priest, and I hope I'll have it for a long time. I could tell you a lot more about it, but that's for maybe another time. What I want to share with you today is a little bit about these cloths. You'll see the priest use these during the Mass, and there's a certain way to use them to ensure that no fragments are lost. And so this top one is called the corporal. And this is the one that would go on top of the altar. It would go like this. And then the chalice would be placed on top of it. And the priest would stand in front of it for the Mass. And this is where he would set the host and the chalice, where everything kind of happens, is here on this cloth. And this cloth is meant to be here so that if there's any fragments, any particles that fall off of the host, or because the host it's broken at one point, that if there's any of those that are lost, even though you're very careful, that this would catch it, right? They're not going to end up on the altar, they're not going to end up on the floor. This is here to catch it. Now, there's a particular way to fold it, right? And if you're trying to imagine, they thought of this, right? Over the history of the church, they thought of this. It's brilliant to think of a way to fold this so that you would protect whatever fragments, that they wouldn't fall out. And so usually how it's folded, if there's any fragments, they would be in these front 2/3 closest to me. So usually the way to fold it is the bottom. So now all of the particles, any fragments are in this first part, and now we want to fold it to lock those in, right? So the next thing you do is you fold the top, locked in, left side, right side, locked in. Those particles aren't going anywhere, right? They are safely protected in this corporal. Now, the next thing on the chalice that you'll notice is this, which is called a purificator, right? And this is the cloth that the priest will use when he's pouring in the water and the wine. It's the cloth that he'll use to wipe the chalice at different points and when he's cleaning the chalice. Normally, it's not very likely that any of the Eucharist, any of the host or the precious blood would get on this cloth, but it is possible. So after the Mass, this cloth, along with this corporal, need to be clean. They need to be purified, right? Or purified. And there's a special way to do this. And again, this is a reflection of our belief in the real presence. So normally what would happen is after the Mass, I have this bowl, and actually I have 3 of them, right? After the Mass, these would get placed in the bowl. And then what would happen is to purify them, I would fill it with water, and these would be submerged underwater, usually overnight, but at least for a few hours. And the idea is that if there's any pieces of the bread that are any fragments in here, that they would be dissolved. The water would absorb them, like they would be dissolved, and once they're dissolved, then Jesus is no longer present. And so by leaving them for some time, it would be dissolved in the water, but that's not enough, right? We want to be very careful because this is Christ, the body and blood of Christ. So we got to make sure. So we're actually instructed to have 3 bowls, not just 1, but 3. So we do one dunking, that's not a proper way to say it, but one's submerging it in water for quite a while, and then we would move that to the next bowl and do the same thing again for a little bit longer, and finally the 3rd bowl and do the same thing again for a bit longer. And each time the water that's left over, it's not poured down the drain, but it's poured down a sequarium, which is a special drain that goes straight into the ground. So it's not going into the sewage system at all. Again, another just safeguard so that if there's anything remaining of Christ, that it's not being sent down into the sewage or something, right? Wherever the drains go in our church building. So I wanted to share those 3 things with you just because I think they're ways that the church helps us and helps us to live out this belief, right, in the real presence of Christ, and being careful for the priest, the way that he's holding his hands, being intentional and careful about the folding of the cloths, and then also purifying them properly. So we have the utmost respect for Christ. We know that love is often in the details, right? In these little details, which these little details that we do, it's one of the ways that we show Christ that we love him in the Eucharist.